Yo, what's up? This is Eldritch Terror, and welcome back to my channel, where I like to talk about all things spooky, scary, and have a little bit of fun. Today on the channel, we are going to be talking about 28 years, days, weeks later. Whatever you want to call the series, we've got a brand new entry into the franchise coming out today, and it has been almost 2 decades since the last one, so I figured it was a good time for us all to brush up together. That's right, we're going to talk about everything that there is to cover about this series, talking about all the information that we have about the new movie, as well as me explaining to you guys everything that happened in the last 2 films, so that you're brushed up and prepped for this new chapter. 28 years after the Rage virus escaped a medical research laboratory, survivors have found ways to exist amongst the infected. One group lives on a small tidal island connected to the mainland by a single, heavily defended causeway. When a father and his son leave the island on a mission into the dark heart of the mainland, they discover the secrets, wonders, and horrors of the outside world. The movie was shot back to back with its sequel 28 years later, The Bone Temple, which was directed by Nia DaCosta, written by Garland, and produced by Boyle and Garland together. Oh yeah, did I say new chapter? I meant new chapters. It seems that there's a lot more where this came from, with a whole nother movie already slotted to come out next year. That's right, 28 years later and The Bone Temple were shot in tandem with each other. That's pretty interesting, don't you think? We've seen a lot of strange imagery throughout all the trailers that have been released so far for this third movie, containing a lot of bones and seemingly religious symbols. I mean, hey, these towering boneyards definitely could serve as some sort of a bone temple, don't you think? I'm sure that with this movie coming out today, we will have all of our answers given to us, but before we hop into that, we gotta brush up on our homework, don't we? Let's go over each of the other films now, breaking them all down, explaining them, reviewing them, and going over every little bit that could be potentially interesting going on in this new movie. Whether you're a diehard fan of the series just here for a little bit more prep, or you're someone who's brand new and just really excited for this new entry, you've come to the right place, because now we're gonna go over the whole thing, brushing up and getting a clear idea of what to expect out of this new film. 28 Days Later was the 2002 post-apocalyptic horror film directed by Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland that changed the way that we look at zombies forever. It stars Cillian Murphy as a bicycle carrier who awakens from a coma to discover that an accidental release of a highly contagious, aggression-inducing virus has caused the total breakdown of society altogether. That's right, this zombie rage virus is specifically tuned to amp up the aggression here, and man does it show through the bloody and violent take on the subgenre. Garland took inspiration from George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead film series and John Wyndham's 1951 novel, The Day of the Triffids. Filming took place in various locations in the United Kingdom in 2001, where the crew had to film for very brief periods during early mornings on temporarily closed streets to capture recognizable and typically busy areas when they were deserted. 28 Days Later was released on the 1st of November 2002 in the UK and the 27th of June 2003 in the United States to outstandingly positive reviews and commercial success, grossing a whopping $84.6 million worldwide on a budget of just $8 million. It shocked the box office and became one of the most profitable horror movies of that year. Despite Boyle not considering it a zombie film, 28 Days Later is credited with reinvigorating the genre and influencing a revival in it a decade after its release with its fast-running infected and character-driven drama. The movie begins with a group of animal rights activists infiltrating a scientific laboratory in Cambridge. Inside this lab houses some super freaky and abnormally aggressive chimpanzees. One of the activists manages to free a chimpanzee despite being gravely warned by one of the scientists that it is no ordinary monkey. No, this primate has been infected with a hyper-contagious virus. Because of this, it quickly attacks her, and within seconds of exposure, she succumbs to the brand spankin' new-to-man rage virus. The girl immediately kirks out and attacks the others, and in no time at all, the rage virus manages to spread rapidly across Great Britain, resulting in total societal collapse. Now, 28 days later, bicycle carrier Jim, who had survived a gnarly traffic accident and fallen into a coma before the outbreak, awakens from said coma in St. Thomas Hospital, located in London. To his utter shock and horror, he finds it completely deserted. Leaving the hospital, Jim wanders the empty streets of London looking for any signs of life. Here he discovers newspapers headlining a mass evacuation and eventually wobbles his way to a church which contains the aftermath of a horrible massacre. Zombies appear from the shadows and chase chase after Jim, but he is rescued by a couple of survivors named Selena and Mark, who take him into their refuge in a small street-side shop. At Jim's request, the group travels on foot to his parents' house in Deptford, where here he learns that they unfortunately decided to take themselves out in a move of apparent mercy. When dusk settles in, the group decides to stay the night. Jim ill-wittedly lights a candle, which attracts the infected, and they break into the house. Our survivors attempt to fight for an escape, but Mark is wounded while fending them off. Before the infection can take hold of him, Selena immediately pops off and kills the guy. Jim is shocked by this, but she tells him that she is also prepared to kill him in a heartbeat if need be to survive. Spotting a makeshift signal from afar, our two remaining survivors make their way up Balfron Tower. Here they encounter cab driver Frank and his young daughter Hannah in one of the flats. Here Frank plays for them a military radio broadcast seemingly offering protection and salvation from infection at a blockade outside of Manchester. Frank plans to take Hannah to the safe haven blockade, and the four agree to travel there together. When the group finally reaches Manchester and finds the blockade, it's unfortunately by now been completely deserted. Frank, feeling the frustration of this miracle being a false alarm, lets out his anger with a kick to a nearby really tall gate. What he doesn't notice, however, is that on top of that really tall gate out of his sight is a dead body of a zombie, and it's balanced just right so that a drop of blood falls from the corpse right to the center of Frank's eye, infecting him right there on the spot. As he warns the others, hidden soldiers appear and shoot him dead right there. The soldiers bring Jim, Selena, and Hannah to a heavily fortified mansion under the command of Major Henry West and treat their guests to a tour and a banquet. However, the sanctuary turns out to just be a ruse, of course. West reveals to Jim that his broadcast was intended to lure female survivors into slavery. Jim and Sergeant Farrell refuse to go along with this scheme, so West orders them to be shot. The two soldiers do shoot Farrell and then argue, allowing Jim to escape. While making his escape, Jim sees a jet trail in the sky, showing proof that the outside world is still active somewhere out there. After luring West away from the mansion with a siren and killing a soldier, he returns and frees Private Mailer, an infected soldier which the others kept chained up for observation. Mailer goes wild and infects and kills the remaining soldiers. One of them attempts to abduct Selena, but Jim kills him with such ferocity that Selena momentarily fears that Jim must be an infected himself. Noticing that he's not, however, his heroic actions earn him a kiss from his new friend. Jim, Selena, and Hannah attempt to escape in Frank's cab, but West, who has been hidden in the back seat, shoots Jim in the stomach. Hannah retaliates by putting the cab in reverse, allowing Mailer to pull West through the rear window and kill him, before our survivors finally drive off and escape. Another 28 days later, Jim recovers at a remote cottage, where the infected are shown lying on the roads, already showing signs of dying of starvation. As a jet flies overhead, Jim, Selena, and Hannah unfurl a huge cloth banner spelling the word hello. The three survivors wave at the jet and wonder among themselves if the pilots would be able to spot them. The DVD release of the film included 3 alternative endings, all of which conclude with Jim actually dying here. One involved Jim dying of his gunshot wounds. In another, Jim dreams of the accident that left him in his initial coma as he dies from that gunshot wound. The third ending features a more radical departure and was presented only in storyboards. Instead of Frank being killed by soldiers after being infected, the other survivors tie him up and discover a research laboratory at the blockade. Here, Jim would undergo a blood transfusion in order to save Frank. The US cinematic release even decided to include one of these alternative endings after the film's credits in response to some intense online debates over whether or not it was a more appropriate conclusion than the official ending. 28 Days Later was a film that changed zombie horror forever. It's violent, it's packed with drama, it's absolutely bleak. It really just hit on a level that a lot of zombie movies hadn't really dared to go to. They broke the ceiling and reinvented a genre that people didn't really think that there was much to reinvent there. I mean, it's zombies we're talking about. They walk around all slow and they eat brains, you know what I'm saying? But the rage virus infected zombies were absolutely something different. They just hit on another level. The rage virus itself is pretty interesting. It seems that it was born from primates and was then passed on to humans, specifically pointing to this little activist encounter here. Just that little bit of exposure seemed to be enough to get the whole thing spread out to what we now know is taking over just about the whole world. So how did it get to this point? How did it get to the point where it's still lingering around 28 years later? I mean, just 28 days later, we were seeing that bodies were decaying here and they were already rotting, right? Well, let's look to the sequel sequel now, 28 Weeks Later, and see how that expands on things. 28 Weeks Later was the 2007 post-apocalyptic horror film, and it serves as a standalone sequel to its predecessor of a similar name. With Boyle and Garland missing behind the camera, this franchise installment was written by Rowan Joff, with directing from Juan Carlo Fresnadillo. This chapter is set after the events of the first film, depicting the efforts of the United States-led NATO forces to establish a safe zone in London. Here, the consequences of two young siblings breaking protocol in an attempt to find a photograph of their lost mother would result in the reintroduction of the rage virus into the presumed safe zone. During the initial outbreak of the rage virus, Donald Don Harris, his wife Alicia, and 4 more survivors hide somewhere in a cottage on the outskirts of London. Inside, they hear a terrified boy pounding on the door and decide to let him in. Just moments later, infected who have followed the little boy break into the shelter. Don pleads with Alice to leave the targeted child, but she can't do this and refuses to go. Seemingly left with no other options, Don escapes on a boat, leaving his wife as well as the others behind to die. 28 weeks later, when the infected start to die off of starvation, NATO forces take control of Great Britain and begin rebuilding the area. It has again been some weeks since the initial rage virus zombie outbreak, and the US military, under the command of Brigadier General Stone, decides to bring in settlers and refugees to shelter. Among these new arrivals are Dawn and Alice's children, Tammy and Andy, who were out of the country during the initial outbreak. Here they are admitted to District 1, a heavily guarded safe zone in the Isle of Dogs, where they are reunited with their father. Dawn is very happy to see his children, but he lies to his kids about the circumstances surrounding their mother's presumed death. Tammy and Andy sneak out of the contained safe zone and return to their former home, hoping to recover a photograph of their lost mother. Inside of their abandoned home, they find many of their discarded belongings, but they also find their mother still very much alive and in a delirious state. Just then, soldiers who had been alerted by Doyle arrive to the home and return the misbehaving children to their new sanctuary of District 1. Alice is brought back as well, but is quarantined for safekeeping and has a few tests ran on her by resident Dr. Scarlet. Through these tests, we learn that she has become an asymptomatic carrier of the rage virus. Dawn makes an unauthorized visit to Alice, begging her to forgive him for the whole, leaving her to die thing. But Dawn here doesn't realize that even though she isn't showing it, his wife still got that rage in her. And after dropping her a little ill-advised kiss, Dawn immediately becomes infected from her saliva and freaks out, brutally killing her before going on a total zombie rampage. The doctor, Scarlet, rescues Tammy and Andy from an isolation room, here theorizing that they could have inherited some kind of genetic immunity to the virus through their mother, and this could very well lead to a definitive cure to the rage virus itself. By this point, Dawn has instigated a concerning domino effect of rapid infections and began killing numerous refugees and military personnel. Unable to contain the chaos, Stone orders military guards to fire on everyone in the entire safe haven, demanding they shoot indiscriminately. Doyle refuses to comply and leaves his post to assist a small group of fleeing survivors. Here, a panicked Delta Force sniper kills 2 of the group, but Doyle returns fire and takes him out, leaving himself, Scarlet, Tammy, Andy, and another survivor, Sam. The group reaches the edge of District 1 as the Air Force firebombs the whole zone in a last-ditch effort to conceal the virus. Somehow, Dawn survives this and follows them into the now abandoned London. Doyle's colleague Flynn flies his helicopter to Regent's Park to rescue Doyle, but tells him he has to abandon the others. As a crowd of infected zombies discover the 5 escapees, a desperate Sam latches onto the flying helicopter, but is infected himself when Flynn uses his rotor blades to kill the crowd. Flynn instructs Doyle to meet him at Wembley Stadium alone, but Doyle disregards the orders and decides to keep the trio with him. They break into an abandoned Volvo to escape the nerve gas that has been released to kill the infected, but are unable to start the car. As more soldiers with flamethrowers draw near, Doyle exits the car to push start it and is consequentially burned alive for his efforts. Scarlet and the children take shelter from the aerial gunfire in the London underground, navigating the expansive darkness with only a night vision rifle scope. Dawn ambushes them, killing Scarlet and biting Andy. Tammy is here forced to kill Dawn, and Andy becomes an asymptomatic carrier just like his mother. Vowing to stick together, Tammy and Andy reach Flynn at Wembley Stadium, who reluctantly then flies them to France. 28 days later, later, a French voice is heard requesting help through a radio in Flynn's abandoned helicopter. A group of infected emerge from a Paris metro station near the foot of the Eiffel Tower, here revealing that the virus has now spread to the mainland of Europe. So now, 28 years later, how different will the world be? As stated earlier, at the end of the first movie and at the beginning of the second one, zombies were already starting to decay away and die, so how have they made it lingering around this long? And into the main story of the whole thing was them trying to develop a cure, wasn't it? I mean, at the very end of it, Paris does kind of get overtaken with zombies, so it's led to assume that they didn't come up with that cure after all, but I mean, I guess that's besides the point, isn't it? But my point is that there's been so many years since the initial zombie outbreak. How have the zombies lingered around this long? These are some questions I want to see answered in this film. Also, I'm really interested to see how this brand new entry into the series sets up for its own follow-ups and sequels, you know what I mean? Presumably speaking, this movie is setting up a whole new world within the franchise. I'm sure that this is going to take part in its own design here. Something I do think is really funny is that one of the reasons why it's 28 years later is actually because of how many years it's taken to get this movie into development, and that's coming from the creators themselves. Trying to push this thing into production was a really hard time, and it was documented every step of the way. Way back in 2007, Fox Atomic confirmed potential for a third film in the franchise, dependent upon the financial performance of 28 weeks following its home video release. In July of that same year, Boyle said that the story for a third installment had even already been mapped out. 3 years later, in 2010, Garland stated that due to differences involving the film's rights, the project had been delayed. A few months down the line, however, Boyle stated that he believed the project would eventually be fully realized onto the big screen, confirming further developments for the story were in progress. Roughly 5 years later, in 2015, Garland addressed the project's status, confirming that while it had fallen into development hell, there were still some serious discussions going on behind the scenes to eventually produce the project, reiterating that development was progressing, stating that the script he was working on would tentatively be titled 28 months later. Now, some 16 years after the writing of the initial script in 2023, Boyle and Garland expressed in collaboration their intentions to seriously and diligently see the project brought to production, while announcing that the script was now titled 28 years later, acknowledging the years it had been taken to get it into development. Boyle stated that he would like to serve as director unless Garland chooses to. Cillian Murphy himself even stated that he had recently discussed the possibility of the third film with Boyle, once again expressing his interest in reprising his original role from the first film, if Boyle and Garland returned to the franchise in their creative roles. In January of 2024, it was announced that the third film, titled 28 Years Later, was officially in development, with plans for the project to be the first of a new trilogy of sequels. Danny Boyle will direct the first installment with a script written by Alex Garland, while the latter will also write the scripts for each of the planned sequels. Boyle and Garland will both serve as producers. In February of the same year, Murphy discussed his potential involvement with the project, and Garland confirmed that he is writing a trilogy of sequel films. So, that is all of our 28 years later homework, ladies and gentlemen. How do you guys feel about the series so far? What's your favorite entry in it of the first two? If you've seen 28 Years Later, let me know in the comments down below how you felt about the movie and how excited you are for the new direction that the series could be going in. I personally am very excited to get out to the theater and see it tonight. You can expect a full review and explanation breakdown here on the channel tomorrow. Get ready for that and hit that subscription for more. Also, if you just enjoyed my video today, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content just like this. I'm still pretty new over here on YouTube, but I've got hours of awesome horror content over on the channel for you guys to check out. Be sure to head over there and browse my catalog. You'll probably find some other things you enjoy too. And if you really like my video today, be sure to send it over to a friend you think might enjoy it too. As always, I've been Eldritch Terror, and whether your day's been going good or bad today, I hope it gets better.